Okay, folks, I think we're at 9:30. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here. I would like to acknowledge that we are within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. And here we go with the Infrastructure Services Agenda. I would be interested in seeing a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. I would like at this point, just before our delegation, to entertain a motion to receive our first report, Groundwater Investigation Phase 2 results, so that we can discuss that after the presentation. Motion, thank you. Second, all in favor? Thank you very much. Now I would like to welcome Marta Green, Associated Environmental Consultants regarding groundwater investigation.
Thank you, Chair. The presentation will be coming up here, so. There we go. Yeah, so good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to present the results of our most recent work for the SCRD. And as mentioned today, the topic of the presentation is the results of the Phase 2 groundwater investigation. So in this presentation, I will be discussing the goals of the project and then the methods used to meet those goals. And then we will have a little educational briefing on introduction to hydrogeology. Then we'll go through the results task by task and finish off with the conclusions and the recommendations. All right, so the ultimate goals of the groundwater investigation project was to help figure out how to reduce the dependency from the Chapman and Edward Lakes sources during the dry summer months by finding another source of water, and in this case, groundwater. So the Phase 1 was basically a desktop study using available information to come up with some sites to move forward with the drilling, and mostly looking at where are there some nice big aquifer deposits and also just ease of access for the SCRD. So Phase 1 came up with these 4 sites. Grey Creek, right next to Grey Creek, just 7 kilometers north of Sechelt, and then the Dusty Road well is within Sechelt there, near the gravel pit, and then the Mahan Road well, obviously on Mahan Road, and then the Church Road well near the Grantham's Landing Old Hall. So then the goals of Phase 2 basically are to answer these 2 questions. Are the aquifers at the well sites from Phase 1 suitable for a municipal supply, both related quantity and quality? And if so, what are the next steps and costs to incorporate those new well sources into the water system? So to meet those goals, we had 9 tasks as per the RFP, but just in summary here, it involved drilling the 4 wells and then completing pumping tests, assessing impacts to other neighboring well owners and aquatic resources, fish primarily, and then we also assessed the water quality and the treatment required to bring it up to drinking water standards. We looked at some source protection, and then using all of that information, we evaluated the wells against each other to select which one to move forward with. And once we selected a well, then we developed, did more engineering and costing to figure out the cost to bring the well field into production. And a well field is just sometimes to maximize an aquifer capacity, you need to put in more than one well. All right, so a little break for some school. So we're going to go through some concepts to help with the rest of the presentation. So the figure on your left shows how groundwater flows under non-pumping conditions. So groundwater is part of the natural water cycle, and it's recharged by rain and melting snow, and by some wetlands, lakes, and streams infiltrating through surface, through the unsaturated zone, and into an aquifer. An aquifer is a geological formation, either bedrock or unconsolidated silt sands or gravels, where the spaces or the pores between the material is saturated. So this figure shows how you have recharge coming into the aquifer, and then it shows how groundwater travels horizontally through the aquifer, and then it shows it discharges naturally to natural discharge points in streams or directly to the ocean. The figure also shows you can have a bit of saltwater intrusion impacting some of the groundwater, but this is only within 50 meters about to the coastline. Fun with this little pointer here. So under pumping conditions, your well acts as a point of artificial discharge, and the groundwater would otherwise continue to flow down its natural path. Another important concept of groundwater is it moves a lot slower than streams. So in a high groundwater system like sands and gravels, the groundwater can move 1 meter a day. That would be considered a fast-moving system. And the lower Gibson's aquifer has been calculated to flow at around 400 meters a year, which makes sense. But in other lower groundwater systems, like clay or a silt, it can actually take years or decades to move the same meter. So pumping a well can speed up the flow of aquifers slightly, but not significantly. The other interesting concept of aquifers is they hold a lot of the world's water. 30% of the world's water are stored in aquifers, compared to only 1% of all of the streams and lakes combined. The other 70% is locked, obviously, in icebergs and glaciers. All right, so one more slide on hydrogeology here. In this project, we were drilling into unconsolidated aquifers, which are sand and gravel aquifers, as opposed to bedrock, because bedrock wells don't typically yield enough water for large community supplies. So the sand and gravel aquifers in BC have been formed between glaciation periods, when there's lots of water moving as the climate is warming. So these large glacial rivers carry all the sediment from the mountains, and these rivers start losing their sediment load as they hit flatter valley bottoms or the ocean floor. So the river drops the gravels first because they are heaviest, and the fines continue along. So this sorting of materials is what gives the sand and gravel aquifers the porosity and the large pore space that we need for the high-capacity aquifers. Aquitards are deposited during glaciation periods when the climate's cooler. So this is when you have lots of ice and lakes around. So this is when you get that Vachon till, the confining layer of clay deposited on top. So on the coast here, you guys have both confined aquifers below this confining layer. So these deposits are called the pre-Vachon. They're over 50,000 years old. And then you have unconfined aquifers on top of the till layer. So if you have this confining layer on top of your aquifer, it's called a confined aquifer, and those wells into those aquifers are called artesian wells. So another term is called a flowing artesian well, and this is exactly the same as an artesian well. It's just that the pressure is on top of the ground surface at the well point. The pressure is coming from elevation higher up, where the aquifer, the confined aquifer, is connected to atmosphere. Phew, got that covered. All right, so now we can talk about the results of the work we did. So we're going to start at the drilling at Grey Creek site. So here we drilled just off the side of the highway there on the right, on MOTI right-of-way. And in this particular site, we just missed the edge of the alluvial fan. And at the point of our drill site, the aquifer was just too thin to do anything with. so we didn't continue with this site. However, there are wells, you can't see them here, but there are wells on this property that are very high producers. So there is potential that we'll talk about at the recommendations. So now we're moving further east. So the Dusty Road well site, right in front of the sign for the future District of Sechelt Operations Center and across the street from the Lehigh gravel pit. So here we were successful in contacting a very thick sand and gravel sequence to 84 meters, and we were able to tag the bottom of the aquifer, unconfined aquifer, and that gives us with a water table of 30 meters, it gives us an unconfined aquifer thickness of 31 meters. And here's an example of some of the sands and gravels that are in the sequence. All right, so moving further east on Mahan Road now. This is the end of the cul-de-sac on Mahan Road. And here we were also successful at intercepting a really nice sand and gravel aquifer. This one is protected by a blue clay at surface, but because the water level is within the aquifer, it is deemed unconfined. So we've got 47 meters thick, and again, we have a successful completion there. This is our Church Road well site. We intersected this confined aquifer again, the Pré-Vachon aquifer, and it's a little bit thinner, but still a very good aquifer. On to the pumping tests and well interference, which is how we assess impacts to neighboring wells. Grab my notes here again. So we use pumping tests to learn about aquifer properties and size and impacts to neighboring wells and sometimes aquatic resources. So what we do here is we pump the well at a constant rate, and by taking water levels in the well, we can measure the response of the aquifer to that stress, to that pumping. So from that, we can learn if there are any boundary conditions. We learn about the properties of the aquifer, and we could also estimate a long-term sustainable well yield. So to do this, the province uses the actual rates observed during drawdown, during the test, to predict the drawdown over a longer period of time. So we continue this line to 100 days, and then we plunk this into this formula multiplied by what's called the available drawdown, which is the distance from the top of your aquifer to the screened portion of your well, and you usually put your pump right there. And it also includes a 30% safety factor to allow for water level fluctuations over years or through seasons, and a little bit of well interference. All right, so the pumping tests were very, very good. The Dusty Road came out on top with a sustainable well yield of 64 liters a second, with Mahan next and Church Road about a third, I suppose, of that. For some perspective, Canadians typically use 500 liters per person per day, so that's enough. This would be enough water. Dusty Road would be enough water for 10,000 people, and Church Road would be enough for 4,000 people, and that's per well. So during the pumping test, we were able to monitor some observation wells, and from that we can kind of do the same thing, extrapolate our drawdown to figure out what we think will be the interference on OBS wells, on other well users in the neighborhood long term. So the Dusty Road was a little bit tricky, but we didn't see any interference on this well, and this well we weren't able to access as much as we would like, but we were able to, they were pumping, the Lehigh was pumping their well during the test, so we didn't see any response in what they were pumping in our well, so that suggests the likelihood of interference is pretty minimal. Mahan Road, we did see interference in the 2 wells we monitored, which was 498 Mahan Road, which is 250 meters away. And then the Ministry of Environment quite handily had a OBS well, which they used specifically to look at water levels and fluctuations in water levels. And so we predicted that we would have a 0.7 and a 0.5 meter interference in these 2 wells. And the owner thinks this well is 400 feet deep. So worst case scenario, the SCRD, if they put a well on Mahan Road, would perhaps need to lower the pump slightly, but we don't think that there is anything major there. As far as the town of Gibson's, they're 1 and 1.5 kilometers. Their wells are maybe over here, something like that. And they actually, we think they show, when their wells are pumped, they show response in this well of 0.3 meters. You can see the graph kind of goes like this. So we're thinking mirror image. If we had a well on Mahan Road, there could be a 0.3 meter interference on the town of Gibson's wells. But their wells are, we have one well, well 3, 25 meters deep, and it's actually flowing artesian. So worst case scenario would only be 1 to 2% when they're pumping, and when they're not pumping, it could be a benefit because it means you're having less pressure, so less waste to storm when the wells aren't pumping. Okay, next section, after the pumping test, we did a little bit of work on impacts to aquatic resources. And the reason why this is important is because the new Water Sustainability Act requires new groundwater users to apply for a water license. And the decision makers must consider environmental flow needs when they make their decision. And so first you need to figure out if the aquifers and creeks are connected. And then if they are connected, what are the impacts of your proposed groundwater withdrawal on fish? So we did a little bit of work here. All the creeks do have fish, and they do, the flow does go down in summer. So any increase, any more reduction in flows, if they're connected, would need further assessment as far as the impacts to the fish. So the hydraulic connection is actually quite important. And we, because of the unconfined setting, Dusty and Ergens Creek pairing, we've deemed connected. Mahan Road and Charming Creek are likely not connected because of that confining layer that we talked about. And Church Road and the Soames Creek are historically probably not connected because we're in a confined aquifer, but unfortunately we have some flow from the relief valve at the Grantham's Landing providing cool, clear water to Soames Creek, which fish would love. So we would need to further assess that. But impacts to wells and impacts to fish are all parts of the assessment that go into an application for a new groundwater use license. So it's not unnormal to do this. All right, on to water quality and source protection. Excellent story here. You guys have absolutely beautiful water. There's absolutely no treatment needed except for log inactivation of viruses because they are in, somewhat of a residential neighborhood with septic lines, and those could be considered virus sources. And there's a low saltwater intrusion potential at all 3 sites. All right, so the goal of source protection is basically to keep your clean water clean into the future. So what we did here is we first mapped capture zones for each of the well sites. And basically these zones are within which groundwater located here will flow into the well. You'll see there's different capture zones. There's a 200-day, a 5-year, and a 20-year, and that's because there's different contaminants that flow and move differently through groundwater. So after the capture zones are mapped, then you look at the areas within that could be considered potential source of contamination. And so highlights with that work was obviously the gravel pit operation at Dusty Road is an industrial, one of the largest gravel pits in North America. And so you could have leaks and spills from hydrocarbons and whatnot. And I understand their plan is to expand to the west, which would basically wrap around here. Compared to Mahan Road and Church Road, it was just low density residential, pretty much, and maybe a little bit of commercial. It's also important to note that, remember, the Dusty Road was that sand and gravel all the way from surface, and the Mahan Road and Church Road both have that really nice protecting clay layer on top of the aquifer. All right, so we brought all that information in, and then we evaluated the well sites against each other to help us decide which well to move forward with to conceptualize as a production site. So to help with that, we did a little bit of engineering costing, and this brings in electrical, drilling a production well, piping, treatment, all of those costs. And so it was a construction cost estimate only, just to compare apples to apples. So Church Road came out as the most expensive. I think we had to bring in 3-phase power for that. And Dusty Road ended up being the most cost effective. And then we did some operating costs, which are shown at the bottom there. Again, this is per well, so you can see the difference in flows there too. So we brought in all that information, and we had a workshop with a couple engineers, me as the hydrogeologist, and there was several operational and management staff from SCRD. And so we looked at criteria in 4 general categories, and we scored each well against each criteria, and we also agreed on an importance weighting for each criteria. So Church Road scored the highest because it scored high in the well interference category so 5 is a good score and 1 is a poor score. And so it scored high in the well interference because there's less neighboring wells around to worry about. Let's see what else. It scored high for the access land ownership because the infrastructure could be put on SCRD owned land versus rights of way or having to purchase private land. And it scored high on the source protection, again, because of that capping layer and because it's got Soames Hill Park and Shirley Macy Park right in its capture zone. So we then moved forward with doing a little bit more detailed cost estimating for developing a production well field at Church Road. So there is room to do a second well, and the pipes can handle flow up to 50 liters a second without too much changing of piping networks and whatnot. So we developed more detailed cost estimates, and these ones include all of the engineering, contingency, and whatnot. So we've got basically 2 options here, one with 1 production well, option A, to 26 liters a second, and one with a second production well, which will give us flow up to 47 liters a second. So you can see the cost for that, and then you can see the annual operating costs as well. All right. So conclusions, we successfully completed 3 of 4 sites with exploratory wells, and the sustainable well yields are between 25 and 64 liters a second. Again, that's between enough water for 4,000 to 10,000 people at 500 liters per person per day. And then we evaluated all of the well sites against multiple criteria, and the Church Road well site scored highest. So then we developed some next steps with some budgets and some time frames. And so the next step, what I'm recommending is you'd want to go ahead and do that application and get your water license for a new groundwater use before you spend too much more money. So once you have that, and unfortunately we're allowing for 1 year to get that water license based on recent experience. And then in the meantime, you could work on doing another test hole at the location of the proposed second production well, and that would be at the reservoir site that's on the corner of Elphinstone Ave and Fisher Road, just at the end of Elphinstone Road where the Church Road well is. And then once you've got your license in hand, then you could go ahead and do the detailed design and the construction. So other recommendations, we've still got some great data from the other well sites, so it's probably worth doing a little bit more aquifer mapping at Mahan Road, and I'm pleased to hear that the Ministry of Environment is doing that right now, so we want to make sure we share all of our information with them. A lot of the aquifer maps that are available to the public are actually wrong. And so it's really, really exciting that they're doing that. And a lot of the well logs, the locations are actually wrong too. So if you pull up that registry, please take it with a grain of salt. I think it's still definitely worth exploring that alluvial fan aquifer connected to Grey Creek. And I would put Dusty aside for now until all the other options are exhausted, just because of the risk from the industrial area there. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And now I would like to see if the directors have any questions. Director Seegers.
Thank you. I know you mentioned the Grey Creek area, and in your report, and in the report that we're looking at here too, it talks about the fact that there's quite a bit of water there at Target Marine right now. Do we have any kind of idea on quantity?
Thank you. Yes, so it's actually in the Aqua Divine.
Yeah, Divine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing as Target Marine. Sorry.
Okay.
Same company.
Okay. So yes, the Aqua Farm. Yes, they gave us a tour of all of their wells, and they are. I think the well logs say they can do 1,000 gallons a minute, which is around 60, 70 liters a second. Yeah. It is directly connected to the stream, and there's really important fish species in there, so it wouldn't be a slam dunk to get a new groundwater license, but if we are able to transfer licenses back and forth, perhaps there'll be a way to do that.
Because we currently have a water license for Grey Creek. This will be through to staff. I think they may know this. Can we transfer a stream license to become a groundwater or whatever well license? Is that possible?
To staff?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's possible to request the province to transfer a groundwater license, surface water license to groundwater, as long as there is a strong hydrologically connected system in place, and in this case it is. So yes, there is a potential to, if we have some kind of an agreement with the property owner, to request the province to transfer licenses.
So I know that some of the requests we're being asked to make today are with moving forward with Church Road, and I'm wondering if some more information and exploration shouldn't be done on the site out in Grey Creek, given that the volume is a lot higher. I know there'll be cost potentially to work with the landowner, but I guess I'm wondering why we would move forward until we have a little more information on that piece. So that's one piece. And then the other one is around the dusty roadside. I understand the issues with Lehigh. Have we actually had a conversation with Lehigh about their plans? Do we know what their plans are in that area? I know they're mining, but I mean, they've got plans 20 years out. So do we know what those look like? And have we had that conversation?
Who would like to tackle that one? Go to staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. To answer the question regarding the industrial activity at above our current Lehigh site, Dusty site, in terms of the gravel extraction from Lehigh, the potential expansion of the Lehigh or of the gravel activity in that area upstream of the watershed, upstream of the well site, as included in the current agreement between the province and the nation, was not. There wasn't information that was available when we did our phase one analysis. So it's really, if you look at the layout of the land and where the aquifer is mapped, it's really that expansion that is and the potential for that area to become a gravel mine that is really the area of potential impact to this well site. It's not that much the current site, because that's more downstream of, also in aquifer-wise, downstream of the current well site. It's really the potential that those new gravel lands, if they would be mined, and because when they mine, the thickness of the layer, of course, above the aquifer will become really small, really little. So any contamination that could happen on the surface would have an impact on the aquifer and ultimately could impact the well long term. So it is an if discussion. However, that's why we're recommending not to fully abandon and never try to look at it again, but park it for now, first explore the option. And if it would be the only option and there is no option available, yes, then it could be considered for potential development at some point in the future.
Thank you. Any more questions? Director Ties?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the Church Road. The sand and there was a sand issue apparently when you were doing the testing, and so you couldn't exceed 170 gallons per minute. But you calculated that 407 is more gallons per minute is what the eventual yield will be. So I'm wondering why sand won't be an issue when you get to the production well, when it was a problem with the test well.
Ms. Green?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. In the end, the silver lining is that we used what's called an airlift rotary rig. Anyway, very powerful rig, but they aren't able to collect soil samples very discreetly. So the deposit there is many small layers of sand, then gravel, then sand, then gravel. And so it's not the right drilling technology for that specific deposit. So you might have noticed the Church Road production wells are actually quite a lot more costly for the depth. So the rig we need to use is called a cable tool. It's actually super old school. But the cable tool, you actually take it's called a baler, but you lower a rod and take an actual sample, and using that technology you can sample these very thin layers of sand gravel, and from that you can design your proper well screen. So we're pretty confident with that technology we can put in a perfectly good well. And as far as the well yield, yes, that's very typical. You can only pump a 6-inch well to a certain volume based on friction loss or whatnot. And so we use the province's guidelines to extrapolate the data and come up with a calculated well yield, and they're working. Like they work. I can't guarantee a well until we drill the production well and test it properly, but all of those costs and plans would be part of the next project. So for the purposes of our purpose here with figuring out aquifer potential, it was sufficient to meet our needs.
Director Lee?
Yes. I'm kind of curious, what's the benefit of transferring a stream lease to aquifer lease?
Staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. We are currently, our current water license on Cray Creek, we're not able to fully utilize it during the summer months because the flows in the creek are just not adequate enough for us to divert a large amount of water. And there are some outstanding concerns there from Vancouver Coastal Health as well in terms of us doing that during the summer. So a potential transfer to a groundwater source could allow us to maybe increase our yields from that area, as well as alleviate some of the concerns from Vancouver Coastal Health. In terms of the question earlier asked by Director Seegers on weighting, and the Church Road, in the staff report, there's an assessment done on how much would, to the extent the Church Road well field would close the water supply deficit we currently have, and also in terms of emergency supply, it would be beneficial to develop that. Staff are recommending to continue with Church Road because it's on a different side of the coast. It's on the southern part of the coast. So in case of redundancy of emergency supply, if there would be a system failure somewhere in Roberts Creek, let's say the Roberts Creek area, the Church Road side would be able to supply the entire southern part of the Sunshine Coast, while, for example, a future development of a Dusty Road side or anything even more feasible, the Cray Creek side or another side, or a reservoir or whatever, could maybe take care of the middle and the northern part of the Sunshine Coast. So from a redundancy point of view, I don't see that there is a competing, that those sites are competing if you look at it from an emergency supply perspective.
Director Beamish?
I think that might have answered the question I was going to ask, and that is, if you go with the Church Road site, what areas would that be actually providing water to? Would it be replacing, for example, the current Grantham's water system? Would it be replacing the longer term, the Langdale water system? Is it going to provide the water in that area? And how does that improve the situation with the overall the Sunshine Coast from the Chapman system?
Staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the recommendations in the report is to do some further analysis on the tie-in options of that well field to the system. Currently, the cheapest and easiest option is to tie it, to make the tie-in as close to the Zone 3 area of the SRD, close to the well side. That would allow us to feed water in to the upper area of just upstream of Gibson and in the Grantham's area and the Soames area. If we were to tie it in at Reed Road pump station and reservoir site, it would allow us to, with some additional infrastructure, to get in emergency situations, the water actually not only into that entire area, but also into Elphinstone and potentially even parts of Roberts Creek. Because it's in terms of how the zones and the reservoir work, it can bring it further up north. So as part of our recommended next steps will be to do that tie-in assessment and do the cost-benefit analysis there of what would be the cost of additional infrastructure required, but what is the benefit not only in terms of water supply during summer, but also in emergency situations.
Yeah, thank you. And I also appreciate it's interesting that the Mahan Road site does actually show a minor, but nevertheless an impact on the wells in Lower Gibson. So it's an interesting tie-in there. Now, what was the time frame those test wells were done?
Ms. Green?
Thank you, Chair. Do you mean the pumping tests?
Pumping test, yes.
Okay. The province recommends 24 hours for confined aquifers and 48 hours for unconfined. So I think one of the wells was 24 and the others were on the 40 to 48 hour range.
And what months were those done in?
Wasn't too long ago. I think over the I think it was late September, October. Yeah. So actually, that's right. Perfect time to do these tests.
So not in the time when we were actually stressed with water in the old system, just in terms of the Chapman system.
Yeah, October is a good time to do it. It's at the end of. That's right. Yeah, and there was one rainy day at Somes. So it's at the end of the long period of no recharge, end of summer, so it is the best time to do it. But there's several safety factors, pond safety factors that we consider. So all of these sustainable well yields were quite conservative.
Director Ties?
Yeah, I just have a question about the application to get that water license from the provincial government. And first of all, what would be the cost involved to make the application, considering the backlog? And the second question would be, who do we have to schmooze to actually get that backlog to be very shorter? So, and if there is a possibility of doing that. So those are my two questions, because I think it would be, if it's not a huge expense, then it might make sense to do the application and then further explore the Grey Creek Road while the application's underway. Thanks.
Who wants to tackle the schmoozing question? Staff?
I can try all my best, and I will start tonight when I meet one of those involved. But in general, the backlog with the ministry is tackled, as far as I know, in a way that new water license application like this one will get priority over existing use applications. So prior to the Water Sustainability Act coming into force, there were already a lot of wells on the coast that will be used. Those applications are treated with a lower priority than any new application like this one. And especially applications from local governments in terms of water supply expansions are treated with a higher priority. And the higher quality of the application, the more information is included, the shorter the turnaround time is. Often the delays in the process of an application is if information is not 100% there, they have to go back and then it's back on the bottom of that priority pile instead of that it stays on top and can be processed really quickly. So that's why it's really relevant to do all the assessments you can think of, connect with the province up front, and to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you apply the application. The consultant in the report included a cost estimate. I think it's about $112,000 to do the assessments and support us in applying for the application. And that would really do everything related to the application itself.
Anyone else? I have a question. I understand that the existing Somes well needs upgrading, so if we were to put in these new wells, we would save some money on that. Do we know how much, staff?
Thank you, Chair. This well has a well field at Church Road, would almost for sure eliminate the required upgrades for the Granthams well. Somes well, we just completed an upgrade there, so we're fine there. It's really the Granthams well that need work, and this would save us several $100,000 of work there.
Director Hilt.
Thank you for that report. That's I'm going to say stunning, awesome, amazing, unbelievable. There's a sentence on page 65 that really caught my attention. I'll just read it out. It goes, this is you were the author of the report? Okay. Interestingly, the results of the drilling and pumping test program suggested the groundwater resources on this part of the Sunshine Coast are larger than previously thought. That's an understatement almost. I'm going, why did we not think this before? Like, this is right under our feet. The Gibson's aquifer has been explored. So it seems like there's more unknown about this aquifer resource than what is known about it. And Director Seegers and people are interested in the information, the completion in the application. So I'm kind of, whatever we can do to increase the quality of the application and the exploration. I'm thinking about how to get more information about the aquifer resources. The 460 well, monitoring well, the Mahan Road could be possibly a monitoring well on the provincial monitoring network, which would, I think, help with our friends understand, our Gibson's friends understand how the aquifer is, what resources are available. I'm wondering about sort of geophysical, the seismic reflection. If this is oil under our feet, you'd see a ton more effort going. Oil's about, 6 times? Oil's about $500 a cubic meter, I think. Beer's about $5,000 a cubic meter. Water is about 16 cents based on our cubic meter. So we got this wonderful resource. So I'm going, how do we move this forward? Right? This is what the public in my area was saying. We want this moved forward as fast as possible. So any way to phase it and get more information. So, I'm stunned. I'm really bowled over by it. It's amazing.
I hope you figured that question out.
I'll try again. Sorry. I'm just. It's unknown. There's more under our feet which is unknown, and we haven't, as a region, looked at this as a resource. And I guess underlying is the assumption is we're going to run the wells for 4 months. If this resource is there as a year-round resource, what would be the impact on the water system for the treatment plant system? High-quality water, doesn't need water, that type of thing?
All right, we'll go to staff.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the impacts, thank you for the compliment of the work of the consultant, and I'm very pleased with the results as well as from a technical point of view. There is indeed a potential on the coast to develop potentially more wells, but I think it also the test well work showed that there might be potential, but to actually get to the production, there's more involved, and it's not only do we have enough water, it's also can we actually expect some sustainable and safe yield from those sites. Having said that, there is more work to be done, and the province is currently updating their water mapping work, which is really to define aquifers and assess the boundaries. And as the consultant described it to me prior, the current aquifer mapping is more like Columbus arriving at the west coast of America, this is what I see, so this is what it looks like. So it's really, really old. So the process is currently being updated with updated information, and that information will include all data from this analysis, and I know from the work that the town of Gibson has been doing, et cetera, et cetera. So we really hope that they will give us more information where are potentially further spots where it would be reasonable to recommend further investigation. And the only way you can actually know what's there is by drilling a test well and doing the work that we did. So, but because it's not cheap, it's expensive, it's worthwhile to await the new updated information from the province, and then review it again and see, okay, where are those sites? In terms of how that relates to the current recommendation on Church Road, is yes, there might be other sites on the province that might be of good yield as well, and might be on the Sunshine Coast, but I think it is really a decision by the board, by the committee, if waiting is the approach, waiting for more information of further sites, of the potential further sites, or the moving ahead with this site is desired. Thank you.
Would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo Remco, here we have a plan where we have immediate action to get wells into production, and honestly, you could do aquifer mapping till the cows come home. And so I think we have the staff and myself are recommending, that you do get going on one of these sites. The more wells you drill, the more you learn in general, and then yes, definitely get in touch with the province and get going on the aquifer mapping, and perhaps partner with them financially to get that going. And so that way you have various phases. Your far advanced phase at actually putting the water into production, and then you have some longer term plans.
Director Seegers?
I think Director Ties actually was in front of me.
Director Ties.
All right. Thank you. I guess the aquifer mapping process by the province, in the report, it recommended that maybe the SCRD tries to become an active member in that process and shares their data. So I'm wondering if that's been done, and if not, should we maybe make a motion that that staff do contact the provincial government and then kind of become an active member of that whole aquifer mapping process?
Staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've been already in contact with the provincial staff working on the mapping, and I indicated to them that as soon as this report was public and discussed here, I would share it with them along with any other information we have available. So those relationships are already in place. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. So the recommendations that you put forward in your presentation talk about doing a technical assessment and then the new groundwater use license application. If we look at the recommendations that are in our report, which we've already received, the first recommendation is that a round one budget proposal with respect to the permitting phase for a well field be brought forward. And I don't know if this actually covers off the technical assessment. And so does it cover off the technical assessment is one question. And then what is the timing for the technical assessment? How much time does that take? And I'm wondering if when we look at this recommendation, given the timing, could we actually just approve this and not wait for budget deliberation so that work can start right away? So it's questions to staff.
To staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. On page 6 of the report, it's listed what would be included in the next phase, what we recommend to be included in the next phase, and what would be included in the budget proposal if that would be brought forward. And that would include application for a license and all the associate technical assessments required. And in terms of the timing of those assessments, one of them is flow monitoring of Soames Creek during the low flow period as well as the higher flow period. So given where we are now in the year, that would be during summer months into the fall when we have the fall rains. So we expect to, or we propose to do that between April, May, and December, so that we can get the application finalized at the end of the year and submit to the province January 1st. That would take then 2020 for them. We account for 2020 for them to process, so that we are ready for the 2021 budget deliberations to include actually, if we get the license and if approved, to continue with to put a proposal forward for the actual development of the well.
Follow up? So given you talked about April, May, and December, we're now in January. How long would it get? I mean, that's a month difference. How long would it take to get that test done now, and would it be relevant and comparable to a December timeframe?
Staff, please.
Thank you for the question, Director. Thank you, Chair. Regardless of when we start, the earlier we start, of course, it's preferred. But we still would need to wait for the entire dry period in the summer to expand. And given how groundwater works and that there is a time lag between when the X-ray is dry and there is no precipitation and when it actually shows up in groundwater, we really need to wait until November for any impacts of a dry summer to show up in the creek flows. So even though if we might start early, we still have to wait until November or December to really confirm that there is no impact or what the potential impact could be of a well on the area.
Thank you. That's clear.
Director Lee?
On the Grey Creek site in the private property, there's already wells. Would it be, if the property owner is cooperative with us, would the cost would be lower to determine if it would be a suitable site for us because the wells are already there. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
Ms. Green?
We didn't explore that, but we'd have to look at that. A showstopper would be the fish, honestly, so it's not a slam dunk. We'd have to assess that.
Staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. It is not the recommendation in the report, in the staff report, is to determine the feasibility further on Grey Creek, and that will include these kind of items, because at the moment there's a potential, but we're not sure if the wells at the private property are do have enough unused capacity for us to even use. So if the development of a new well on that site is required, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why more fulsome discussion and analysis and discussions with them on the feasibility will need to happen before we can confirm the potential for that site. Thank you.
I just wanted to throw in a question here for a minute. In the maps you showed with the recharge zones, for two of the wells, they were sort of large fans, but for the Church Road well, it was sort of a line. And I was wondering why that was.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the question. Okay, so your capture zone is related to your gradient, and so it's very steep here. So that's what the computer models spat out, basically. So that's our best guess at the capture zone. So the gradient must have been steeper at the two sites that had the longer paths. So we don't have lots of water level data amongst, so we just use topography. So it's super duper steep there.
Director Ties?
Yeah, just for the Church Road well, again, in the report, it didn't quite seem clear to me as to what exactly would happen to the Mahan Road well, and if we retire the Mahan Road well because we're putting in the Church Road well, apparently there is some impact on the stream because it's a flowing artesian well. No, not Mahan. No, the Granthams. Sorry. Yes. My apologies. I had the names wrong. Granthams well. So yeah, but retiring the Granthams well, there's some impact on the stream because it's a flowing artesian well. So if we were to retire it, would we plug it entirely, or would we just keep that, try to keep that same amount of water flowing, or would we essentially what might be the plan for the Granthams well in the end? And so that wasn't quite clear to me in the report. Thanks.
Ms. Green? Or, sorry, staff, okay?
Thank you. What we have to do with Grantham's well will be determined by the analysis that we are to undertake. It is, and that's part of the discussion we need to have with the province in terms of how they value the fish population which is currently present, but has not been historically present in that creek. So we have the situation there that what is their baseline, what is their reference situation they would like us to adhere to when we determine the amount of flow need for that creek. Is that the current population, and that might, and which is dependent on the overflow of the current well, or is that your historical situation where that overflow would not be present, and the creek might have been completely dry during parts of the summer. So that's part of the discussion we need to have with the province in upcoming months prior to an application being made. So it could result in that we keep some of the infrastructure in place, but use it to mitigate any impacts of a new well instead of using it as a production well itself. Thank you.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I think it's a question for staff. Kind of the way I'm reading the project from the Church Road is there's a potential for a lot of synergies of this project to solve problems such as the Elphinstone Avenue was scheduled for a water main replacement, asbestos cement from years ago. Grantham's well has some artesian overflow and some sealing issues with it, resilience into Zone 3. So it does seem, to my point of view, look like there's a lot of synergies that can go on with this project that check the boxes off of other projects that are sort of outstanding. Is that kind of a reasonable assessment?
Staff?
I think that's a fair assessment to make, yeah.
Director Ties?
One last question is the recommendation is that round one budget proposal with respect to the permitting phase for well field in the Church Road area be brought forward. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody here is clear that we're talking about 2 wells, and that would be the higher price point. And I personally, it looks to me like that's a better return on investment. So I'm in favor of that. I just wanted to point that out. And then I motion that we look through those recommendations at this point. Thanks.
I think we could, oh, Director Seegers.
So one final question through to staff. So with any part of this Church Road proposal, would delaying the final approval to budget time slow anything down? Is there anything, any part of this that would benefit from moving it forward now rather than waiting for final budget approval?
Now, that's a staff question.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think so. What we would do is once, if this recommendation would be adopted, we would already be thinking about, okay, what would be the next step and anticipate for that, so that we would be ready to move forward with the contracting of second phase once budget is formally approved. Yeah. So we would include it in our work plan for the upcoming months, and we do the homework up front. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Ms. Green for your presentation. It's always fun to come and give us good news. So thank you very much. Director Pratt.
Thank you. Just before we go into the recommendations, I do have some concern with I just want some clarity around the last recommendation in regards to the production well on the Mahon Road site, because it is, and from the report, there was some interference with some of the Gibson's wells, as I'm hearing, and I'm concerned that a feasibility report, would that impact any more of would it require additional drilling, or would it just simply be an analysis of the information that's already there? I know it's created a lot of angst for our neighbors in the town of Gibsons, and I'm fine with a feasibility report if it's simply addressing the information that we already have. However, if it's necessary to go into more drilling, I think it becomes risky for when we don't have the full information around the aquifer. And from what I'm hearing from our presenter is that there's a lot of information that still needs to be done on that mapping in that area.
To staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. The proposed work to confirm the feasibility on the Mahon side would not involve any additional drilling, would primarily involve data analysis, discussions with Town of Gibson staff, share data, collaborate with them on the analysis of the data to collaboratively confirm what are we talking about or what are we doing here in terms of the Mahon side.
Director Beamish.
Yes, I appreciate Chair's concerns, and I also acknowledge that there has been ongoing dialogue now with the town staff on that for sharing of information. And hopefully in a broader sense, when we look at the broader issues of water on the Sunshine Coast, to continue to look at that and have more synergies with staffs on doing that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Director Seeger.
Thank you. So through you to Director Beamish, given this recommendation that's going forward, is the town of Gibsons, and you as their representative here, okay with it as it's stated?
Director Beamish.
Yes, I believe we're fine with it as it's stated, and with the understanding that we're not going to be doing any more additional drilling and things of that nature right now. It's just looking at the feasibility. You know, I guess the question comes, is it a high priority to do that, given that there's going to be a cost associated with that, or are there higher priorities in the short term, because it's a cost to the regional district that the town of Gibsons doesn't bear?
Do we have a sense of what the cost is?
Thank you, Chair. The cost to the SUD would be primarily some data analysis ourselves and some sharing and some staff time to have discussion with Town of Gibson staff or province staff. There would be no additional costs associated with any of this work to hire any consultants or that kind of work. Thank you.
So my question is, are we ready to move the recommendations in the report to get them on the floor? Director Ties, seconder, or question? You're moving. Seconder for, thank you, Director Hills.
Sorry, we were just having a side conversation. Could you please let us know what we're voting on?
We are voting on putting the recommendations on the floor. All in favor?
No, one sec, I have a question then
Okay.
about that. The last recommendation talks about a feasibility report with respect to the production well on the Grey Creek site. Are we looking at the Grey Creek site that was drilled, or are we actually looking at furthering the conversation with Divine Caviar Target Marine site? What are we actually talking about in this recommendation?
Staff, please.
Thank you, Chair and Director, for this clarifying question. It is really the site in general. So this would be primarily be focused on further investigation of the feasibility of a production well on the private property along Grey Creek.
Okay. The motion is on the floor to accept the recommendations in the groundwater investigation report. Do we have any further discussion? Are we ready? Director Hills.
Further to what Director Ties was saying, do we need to tighten up the language in the ANDAD with the putting in phase 3 as an option, just to be clear? Like one of our staff members talked about breadcrumbs. Like, do we want to leave a few more breadcrumbs in this recommendation about that it is the phase 3 option B? Do we need that? I'm thinking of the breadcrumbs in the future.
Do we have an opinion on breadcrumbs?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a specific opinion about breadcrumbs, but in terms of this recommendation, as it's currently worded, it includes the word well field, and which leads to option B. So,
Any further discussion? Well, perhaps we can call for the vote on these recommendations. All in favor? Any opposed? Wonderful. Recommendations passed. Thank you. We're going to take just a 5-minute break right now and then continue. Thank you.